Hi everyone, I'm here today to discuss the 2022 annual monitoring report for the San Elijo Lagoon Restoration Project. Nature Collective was founded in 1987 as a grassroots nonprofit led by a small group of passionate volunteer community members that were concerned about the health of the San Elijo Lagoon. With that same passion, we have now grown to inspire conservation action across North County, San Diego, and beyond for the last 34 years. So to put the restoration of the San Elijo Lagoon into context, I'm going to start by showing these two pictures from 1965 that show the state of the lagoon after significant urban development around it, but before any restoration had occurred. And the main point here is that over the course of developing North County, San Diego, various transportation corridors were built across the lagoon, and all the bridges were made as small as possible in the most convenient place as possible for constructing the roads. This led to reduced tidal circulation within the lagoon and the lagoon closing off on its own from tidal circulation due to the mouth filling with sand. This led to eutrophication events and poor water quality within the lagoon. And so because of that, this was one of the main reasons for the need for the San Elijo Lagoon Restoration Project was that by increasing the tidal circulation and the flow of water in and out of the lagoon and redesigning some of these transportation corridors to take into account both the wetland and the need to move people around the county, we were able to provide an ecological lift of the entire system. An overview of what I'll be talking about today is first the purpose of the San Elijo Lagoon Restoration Project, the process we went through to restore the lagoon, and then an annual monitoring update that covers all of the annual monitoring that was done in 2021 for the project. So the overall purpose of this project was to both enhance and restore the physical and biological functions of San Elijo Lagoon. And this before and after set of pictures here, I think does a really great job of just visually showing kind of the impact that we had on the system. By widening and deepening the channels in the wetland, we were able to allow 3 times as much water to flow in and out of the lagoon every day with tidal circulation. And this alone allows the lagoon to kind of return to its previous state on its own by just making the tidal circulation be enhanced in this way. So that was really the main thing we did during the project, and to both enhance and restore that physical functioning of the lagoon. And for the biological functioning, once we had that water quality set, by recontouring some of the elevations and establishing plants in areas where they could grow, we were able to provide the lagoon a starting point from which to begin regrowing and reestablishing on its own. So this project started with a long period of planning and design that lasted many decades. We then went into a 3 or 4 year construction phase from 2017 to 2021. And then we are now in this post-construction monitoring phase, which goes from 2021 to 2031. This phase is for the initial 10-year performance standards that must be met in accordance with the Coastal Development Permit for the project. In addition to that, there's a second period, which is this long-term monitoring period, and that's for the next 40 years, where we also have permit requirements we must meet for the project. My talk today is going to focus on going over what we did during construction and then going into more detail on this first year of the post-construction monitoring that we have completed. This is another timeline that just shows kind of the period and sequence that we went under for construction. So we had an initial 2 year period you see here in green where we collected a bunch of baseline data on conditions in the lagoon pre-restoration project. We then had this construction period, which you can see here in red. The construction period was followed by a plant establishment period, and that was a point in time where we could see if all the plants that we had planted during the construction period were able to establish and survive, and if they didn't, we had an opportunity to replant. After that, we went into the post-construction period, which is what we're in now, which is this first initial phase of monitoring. So what did we actually do to restore the lagoon? I mentioned it earlier, but the main thing was we widened and deepened the channels. So by widening and deepening the channels, we enable about 3 times as much water to come in and out of the lagoon every day from tidal flow, and then we also allow a better path for storm flows to flow out of the lagoon during large storm events. During this, we took a bunch of sand out of the lagoon. In order to make room for the mud, we were going to move around inside of the lagoon to recontour the channels and elevations to better account for sea level rise. And because of that, we removed about 400,000 cubic yards of sand from the wetland and we placed that on the beach. So there was this large sand replenishment project that was also a part of the project. In addition, a key component of the wetland restoration were these transitional areas, and these are locations where the elevations gradually increase from the high tide level up to about 15 to 20 feet above sea level. This enables a runway for plants to grow on over the next coming decades as sea level rises, where we can have wetland plants having places to slowly grow and establish at higher and higher elevations through time. This picture on the right here is really great, and it really shows you the channels and the cordgrass, and then it transitioning into these upland plants and this really subtle slope that they go up as they go up to the higher elevations. In addition to creating those transitional areas, widening and deepening the channels, we also created a whole bunch of new mudflat areas and low marsh areas. And throughout the lagoon, we did a whole bunch of replanting efforts. Here you can see a new low marsh area that we created in the East Basin, and a bunch of the construction crew out planting transplanted cordgrass in this newly created mudflat area that prior to the restoration project, a large portion of this basin didn't really see much salt water ever. And with our improved channel circulation, we now get full tidal flow east of the freeway, and we're able to establish and maintain a healthy salt marsh ecosystem farther inland than before the project. In addition, with all the sand we moved around, we also had the opportunity to create a large nesting island that is hopefully going to recruit endangered species, including the California least terns and the western snowy plovers. Here you can see some decoy birds we've placed out on those nesting islands, and then one of our avian biologists establishing a gridded system of shelters for these birds where they can hide from predators. That also help us and enable us to better monitor the bird populations that use the nesting island. These two pictures show before and after from Google Earth, where on the left you can see what the wetland looked like before, and on the right you can see what it looked like after the restoration project. The big takeaway here is the increase in the size of the channels that run through the lagoon. You can see this main channel is now much larger and has a much more direct path into the East Basin and extends much deeper into the East Basin. So really enhancing the ability for the system to function on its own through time as a healthy salt marsh ecosystem. Now, throughout this project, we did a lot of restoration monitoring. And for this restoration monitoring, there were kind of two key topics at the front of our mind the whole time. The first, what is success? So how do we determine what success is for the project? And the two key points we focus on throughout the project is no environmental impacts and then an improved wetland ecosystem. So we don't want to harm anything that was already great about San Elijo Lagoon before the project, and then we want to have measurable enhancements to the system post-restoration. Now that we know what we want to be for success, we need to have ways to measure that. So how do we measure this success? And we have three main categories in which we measure the success of this project. First, we have a 5-year-long marine monitoring program. That program is designed to make sure that all the sand we placed on the beaches out in front of the lagoon doesn't cause any negative impacts to our wonderful marine environment. Second, we have these project success standards that I mentioned. These are the standards for the first 10 years post-construction, and that's what I'm really going to focus on in this talk. And then lastly, we have the long-term monitoring success of the project over 50 years. This image here shows the overview of kind of where restoration monitoring occurs. Today we'll be focusing on the area within the white dotted line, which is the wetland itself, and not this larger offshore area, which is a focus of the marine monitoring plan. If you guys have more questions about this, you can always visit our website at naturecollective.org. Go to the projects page and you'll see all the documentation on everything I'm talking about today, from impact reports, monitoring plans, monitoring reports, and data sets to look into more detail on any topic we talk about. As we go into the restoration monitoring, I'm going to talk today about these 10 years of project success standards that we have to meet right now. Within this set of project success standards, we have two categories. We have relative standards, where San Elijo has to function like similar wetlands. And on this picture on the right, you can see our three reference wetlands that we're using to meet these relative standards. It's the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, the Mugu Lagoon, and the Tijuana River Estuary. We have a whole set of standards I'll go through that mean San Elijo can't be worse than the worst performing reference wetland. We also have a set of absolute standards. These absolute standards mean that the San Elijo Lagoon has to be as good or better as it was before the project. So we can't have caused any harm to the system during our restoration efforts. I'm going to go through these restoration standards now. So the first one is topography and bathymetry. This is an absolute standard. You can see the before on the left and the after on the right. And for this standard, what we do is we take this map on the right and we have to make sure that our topography and bathymetry is just topography underwater. We have to make sure all these elevations are within 10, overall, we're within 10% total of what we expected to create from our design for the plan. And you can see here also really clearly how we widened and deepened the channels and the coloring of the elevations on the right with these much larger deep blue areas, which represent deep channels, and then compared to the image on the left. In addition to having these elevations in the lagoon set for our performance standard, which we met, we also have tidal elevations we have to meet. We have 5 data loggers spread throughout the lagoon. These loggers capture the tide height every 15 minutes, and we use all of these first to look at how well the tides are flowing in these areas of the lagoon, and then secondly, to do a residence time calculation for our performance standards. Here's an example of a tidal gauge we have in the West Basin. This is one of the basins that had poor tidal circulation before the project started. And what we have here on the top is an image with a red line showing the tidal height in the West Basin, and the light dotted line showing the tidal height at La Jolla, a reference site in the ocean. You can see there's no low tides in the West Basin because the channel entrance is impeded by sand and there's not an ability for the West Basin to drain out to the lowest of tides. The bottom one shows with this black line where the prior minimum was. We now see, after dredging the channel and improving the circulation in the West Basin, we have low tides at much lower tidal heights than we had before the restoration project, which is a great sign. So for our performance standard calculation, what we do is we take these tide gauges, we make a map of what the tides are every 15 minutes throughout the lagoon. We run this through a hydrological model, and we're able to calculate, on average, how long does water stay inside of the lagoon at all these different locations you see on the figure above. And our performance standard was for the Central Basin, the average residence time had to be 7 days or less, and in the East Basin, it had to be less than 9 days. And we can see in the middle column where it says 2021 average residence time, we exceed both of these performance standard criteria in 2021, where our Central Basin and East Basin residence times are far fewer number of days than the average residence time that was our target for this performance standard. The next thing we measure are wetland habitats. So for wetland habitats, here's a drone footage capture of the entire lagoon. We use the combination of that digital elevation model, our topography and bathymetry, with these drone imagery to then classify based on elevation and cover of plants what type of habitat we have at each spot in the lagoon. So this is what we're shooting for. This is our goal for this performance standard. Blue areas are subtidal, so below mean low water level. Brown areas are mudflats, so these are low marsh areas that don't have plant cover. And then the bright green areas are salt marsh, so these are areas that are in the intertidal zone but have plant cover. And then the yellow areas are these transitional areas. So these are upland areas that are gradually sloped to meet the marsh plain. 2020, this was what our first map looked like. So between this, I'm going to go back and forth now with 2021, and you can see that we're coming closer to meeting our performance standards. So the red circles show the 2 areas I want to focus your attention on. And these are areas where we're having natural enhancement and encroachment of the low marsh areas into the mudflats. And this is exactly what we want. Where areas where we created for the plants to grow in the low marsh plain, we're seeing natural recruitment and growth of the cordgrass in these locations. So when we take all these together and we look at them in our performance standard tables, we can see that we had a total number of acres we were supposed to meet in our development permit for how many tidal channel acreages we have, how much mudflat acreage, salt marsh, and transitional. And for all of these acreage types, we meet the performance standard criteria for them in 2021. You can see additionally for low marsh, we did not meet that performance standard in 2020, but in 2021, we do now have enough low marsh to meet this performance standard. That's due in part to that natural recruitment of low marsh plants we were seeing in that previous slide. In addition to the habitat types, we also measure vegetation cover. So in addition to is if there are plants located in a location, we want to know what the relative health of those plants is. So this graph here, what it shows is the lines show for different categories of plant type. So areas we planted in the low marsh are green, unplanted are blue, and then planted mid and high and transitional are pink and red lines. And basically through the years, we need to have higher and higher percent cover of vegetation in each of these locations to meet our performance standards. The really cool thing about our projects is when you look on the left, these stars show where we are in year one for each of these categories. And the key takeaway is we already have far more vegetation cover than required by our permit in year one. And for 3 of them, we actually have the vegetation cover criteria required to meet and check off permit requirements in year 10. So by all objective quantitative measures, we are exceeding our vegetation cover permit requirements and on track for a successful project. We also measure some specific types of vegetation, including cordgrass. So cordgrass is the preferred habitat of the endangered ridgeway rail, and we measure the density and height of cordgrass stalks throughout the wetland and compare this to measurements in the Tijuana estuary. Here we can see the statistical graph that shows that for this, there's no significant difference between the cordgrass cover and height in San Elijo and that in the Tijuana River estuary. Because of this, because San Elijo is not significantly worse than the reference wetland, we have met our project success criteria for 2021 for the cordgrass Spartina cover. Water quality is another performance standard we meet. This graph on the right shows what the typical water quality measurements look like within the lagoon over the course of a month. The red solid line shows what the hypoxic threshold is for an hypoxic event. That's when oxygen levels in the water go below the amount with which a lot of the aquatic life needs to breathe, and sustained hypoxic events can lead to fish kills and cascading negative effects throughout the ecosystem. It's natural to have short hypoxic events with the tides and the time of day, but it is unnatural for wetlands to have sustained duration of hypoxic events. Our performance standard criteria is that we can't have worse duration or number of hypoxic events than the relative wetlands. We can see here, we look at the 3 reference wetlands in the San Elijo Lagoon. The table at the bottom shows it really clearly that the average length of a hypoxic event in San Elijo is 1.5 hours, where we can see Tijuana and Carpinteria Salt Marsh tend to have 4-hour-long hypoxic events. So we meet this performance standard criteria as well. We also monitor for fish and invertebrates. These are relative standards we measure for the abundance of fish and invertebrates. So just how many do we count during our sampling events. We also measure for the diversity of fish and invertebrates. So how many types of species do we see? When we look at benthic invertebrate density and benthic invertebrate species richness, we can see that for density of invertebrates, San Elijo Lagoon does not yet meet the performance standard, but for species richness, the diversity of invertebrate species, we do meet this performance standard. This is great for year one. It takes many years for invertebrates to come back from a restoration project. We pretty much scraped and recontoured all of the channel bottoms, so these invertebrates are starting from scratch in San Elijo Lagoon, and so we're really glad that we meet the diversity criteria, and we're going to see if we're on track for meeting that abundance criteria. For fish, we are not significantly worse than any of the reference wetlands in either the density of fish or the species richness, the diversity of fish species we see within the lagoon. So compared to the reference wetlands, San Elijo looks similar and not significantly worse than any of them. For birds, we have a whole bunch of specific bird metrics that we measure for, and I'm going to go through each of those individually right now. So first, we measure for the ridgeway rails. So for the ridgeway rails, we can see here that when we look at our abundance and density estimates of light-footed ridgeway rails, that we are not significantly different from what we saw in terms of ridgeway rail abundance and density pre-restoration project. So when we compare it to the baseline in 2016, our current measures are within the threshold we would expect given the performance standard criteria. For least turns, we see the same. So when we look at these, and for all of these bird estimates, I'll caveat it by saying to meet performance standard criteria, we have to take a 4-year running average and calculate statistics on that. Because we're in year one of the monitoring for the project, we can't yet do that 4-year running average, but even just by taking 1 year's worth of data, we can kind of benchmark where we are against our performance standard criteria. So for the least turn as well and the snowy plover, where we are measured in terms of the abundance of these bird species, we see that we do not have any significantly lower abundances for these species compared to our baseline measures. For the Belding Savannah sparrows, we are lower than baseline estimates. Here on the left, you can see our pre-construction surveys in blue, with one in 2017 having far higher abundances than any of our other surveys, and then our surveys post-construction and during construction, where we see abundances more similar to that initial survey in 2016. So we're watching the standard closely because we currently are not meeting it, and we're waiting to see what happens in the coming years with the Belding Savannah sparrow population within the lagoon. We also monitor eelgrass within the lagoon. Eelgrass is a really great success story. It's really hard to grow it if you try to grow it, but if it comes in on its own, that's kind of the best way to recruit it and get it to establish. And when we look at our pre-construction eelgrass survey from 2017, which is the top one, we can see we had about a square meter of vegetated cover of eelgrass. And now in 2021, post-construction, we have over 200 square meters of vegetated eelgrass cover, which is a dramatic success story. We only had to have the same amount as we had before to meet this performance standard criteria. And when we look at a picture, we see a whole bunch of eelgrass that's populated the main channel in the central basin. Before this project, we had no eelgrass in the central basin at all. So this is a great success story, and we're really looking forward to monitoring and mapping how the eelgrass spreads throughout the rest of the lagoon ecosystem. So now when we look at all of these performance standards, when we look at them in context, we can see that San Elijo Lagoon is similar to the other lagoons across the board. So there's one standard invertebrate density in which it is significantly worse, but the other wetlands in the reference wetland set also were significantly worse than other wetlands. So when we take the total number of standards that were similar to the reference wetlands in, San Elijo is not the worst performing, which is that second to last bottom line there. And so we do meet our relative performance standards in year one. We have to meet them for multiple years in a row, but this is a great start. When we look now here at kind of the big picture, overall, all of these relative standards alongside the absolute standards, we can see year one, this column here for 2021, that we check off meeting these relative standards in terms of being not significantly worse than any of the reference wetlands. So that's the first row. And then we can go down to the next set of rows, which are the project design absolute performance standards. So these are things based on project design specs we have to meet. This was the topography and the bathymetry being within 10% of design. We meet those criteria. This is the tidal elevations and the residence time, which I showed you in those initial slides were way lower residence time days than what was required. And then we see this exotic cover, which is basically no exotic species mapped within the lagoon in various locations. We meet that standard as well. When we then go into this pre-restoration absolute performance standards category, we can see that we meet all of these for the various types of birds except the Belding Savannah sparrow. And then when we go down and look at the actual habitat areas, vegetative function, doing a CRAM assessment, and looking at the eelgrass, we can see we meet all of the standards as well. So we need to meet some of these standards for multiple years in a row. So in addition to keeping track of where we are today for each standard in this year one column, we have this final column on the far right, which shows whether or not the final standard is met. And you can see from that, we've actually only met 2 of our final standards so far. So one of them is the Calipara standard, and that is that we didn't introduce Calipara into the system during construction, and we have been checked off on that. The second is this eelgrass standard, and that was, I was showing, we have more eelgrass now than we did at the start of construction. And that's just a one-time monitoring event that we have to do. So we've checked that box off also. But for the rest of these standards, we actually have to measure and meet success criteria for multiple years in a row. So in the coming years, as we have these annual monitoring report presentations, you'll see that as we continue, hopefully, to meet success year after year, we'll be able to check more and more of these standards off. The ultimate goal is to meet all of these final standards prior to year 10, at which point we'll be able to determine that the project was objectively a success in terms of the coastal development permit and all of the project requirements that were implemented through the lagoon monitoring plan. So all this information I've covered today is available on our website at naturecollective.org in the projects page. So if you have any questions, please check out this webpage. Please also feel free to email us at Nature Collective and get in contact with us, and we're more than happy to discuss any aspect of this project that interests you. While Nature Collective gave this presentation today, none of what I talked about would have been possible without the significant help of all of our partners. This is a list of many of our main contributing partners, and I just want to say that we extend our thanks and appreciation to each and every one of these partners, and that the project and the experience you have when you walk through the San Elijo Lagoon and experience nature would not have been possible without all of these groups and agencies and individuals coming together and working as a collaborative team to make this project happen. Lastly, we'd like to invite you to stay connected by visiting our website and our social media pages, and to connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And feel free to connect and go out and experience nature. Looking ahead into the new year, you can come and visit us on our Discovery Tour on January 1st in 2023, and at our Volunteer Restoration event on January 8th in 2023, and the Wings Over the Wetlands at the San Elijo Lagoon Nature Center on January 23rd. So we're really looking forward to seeing you. We also encourage you and invite you to support us. Because of generous people like you, Nature Collective, a 501c3 nonprofit, makes powerful impacts across North County, San Diego, and beyond. And it's thanks to people like you donating. And with that, I would like to say thank you for listening to our presentation today. It's been a joy talking to you, and I would like to close it out and wish you all a Happy New Year.